Well, I appreciate the opportunity to talk tonight about addressing cow-calf ownership costs. We're going to talk tonight specifically about addressing the cost associated with owning cows, and this would be primarily cow depreciation, and we'll also touch a little bit on interest. And when I look at the top three costs for most ranches, the things I see that are the top three are feed. This would be both grazed feed and harvested feed, labor and equipment, and cow depreciation. Labor and equipment, I tie those two together because frequently as we think about labor and equipment, if we're buying equipment, it's in hopes to reduce labor. Conversely, also, if we hire someone to work for us, they're going to probably need to have some equipment to operate just to do their job. So I'm thinking here of a pickup, a four-wheeler, things like that. So labor and equipment often get tied together. And then, of course, the last one being cow depreciation. So as I look at economic analysis and I think about cow depreciation, I'm going to take the approach that we're going to try to understand where's value being created, where do costs occur, and what's the cost-benefit relationship as I think about the use of resources. So depreciation is a challenge, I think, for many cow-calf producers because it's a non-cash cost. This is something that you don't get a bill in the mail for. You don't get an invoice at the end of the year that says you owe $50,000 in cow depreciation. However, it is a real expense, and we'll talk more about that. The other thing we're going to talk about a little bit is interest or opportunity on the capital investment you have in the cow herd. Now, I know that some of you out there might be saying, well, I don't really charge myself interest, because if you look at what you could get for putting that money in the bank right now, it's really not very much, maybe 1 or 2% on a CD. And I understand that. I understand that perspective. However, I'd also challenge you, if I came to you and asked for a $100,000 loan and I just gave you the money back a year from now, most of you would not be very interested in that. You'd want some return on your investment. And so I think it's appropriate, I think it's fair for us to charge ourselves interest on the capital investment we have in the cow herd. Now, if you have money borrowed on the cow herd, obviously you have interest payments due, and so that's should be part of your calculation as you think about your cow cost, is your cow interest that you're paying on a note. But also for those of you who've made an investment in your cow herd, I think it's important to look at some return on your investment. So as we look at this cow depreciation issue, we're really going to try to identify how can we capture more value from cows that are in the herd? How can we, or also how can we reduce the cost of cow depreciation? So cow depreciation is really a pretty simple formula. It's the same as we would use if we were going to go buy a piece of equipment, a tractor, a pickup, a four-wheeler, a baler. We're looking at the purchase price, or in the case for many of you, your development cost. What did it cost you to get a bred female into the herd, minus sales price. And sometimes we talk about this as salvage value. And I prefer to not use the term salvage value, because I think about salvage, I think about a wore out piece of equipment, maybe old pickup, an old car. You haul it off to the junkyard, they weigh it up, and you get paid so much per pound per scrap. I'd really like us to think about cows that leaving the herd differently than that. I think that's part of the challenge for us, is that we've often thought about cull cows almost like a salvage type scenario, which in some cases they are, but we really want to find ways to capture more value from those cows when they leave the herd. And so we're going to talk about sales price. So it's purchase price or development cost minus sales price divided by productive years in the herd. And in our environment, in this industry, we've talked quite a bit about productive years in the herd. There's a lot of emphasis been placed on that. If you look at the popular press, finding ways to have a cow last longer. We know things like hybrid vigor can impact a cow's productivity, the amount of time she stays in the herd. We have expected progeny differences that can help us identify things like that, cow longevity, cow fertility. Those are all things that we've talked about quite a bit. And so we're not going to talk tonight too much about this third one in terms of increasing productive years. I think there's quite a bit of information out there in the industry on that. Not saying it's not important, but we're just not going to spend really much time tonight talking about that. So this is a chart that comes from Chris Ringwald when he was at North Dakota State University, looking at what's the typical age of a cow herd in the northern Great Plains. So he picked a 100 cow herd. Obviously, if you've got 200 cows or 300 cows or less than that, just do the math in terms of how that would break out for you. But if we're looking at around a 17% replacement rate, that means we're going to replace 17 cows annually with bred replacements. If we're bringing those in as 2-year-old, that means our average cow herd age is somewhere between 5 and 6. And that's pretty typical for many cow herds. Obviously, if your replacement rate is higher, it's likely this arrow shifts to the left, meaning your average cow herd age is lower. And if you maybe are able to, for whatever reason, get by with fewer replacements, you might shift that average cow herd age a little more to the right. But this is pretty typical of what I see in many cow herds in Nebraska and the northern Great Plains. Most of us, when we think about our cow herds, I think this comes as a surprise to many. They don't think about the average cow age being somewhere around 5.5. We tend to remember those older cows that are 8, 9, 10, have given us 7, 8 calves. But the majority of our calves are really coming from cows that are 6 and under. And really, we don't have as many cows out after age 6 in most herds. So I want to just look at an example in my mind of the significance or the importance of cow depreciation. So let's say I was to go buy a bred heifer, and this is some numbers reflective of early 2020 when we had quite a few bred cow sales. There was a number of range in there in terms of what bred heifers would bring, but you could go buy some nice packages of bred heifers for $1,600. Some would bring a little more. There's some out there bring less, but that was pretty common. Cull cows in the fall of 2019 would have been bringing somewhere in the mid-50s, not that much different than they are today. So on a 1,200 pound cow, you'd have around $660 as her value for her when you took her off the ranch if you just sold her as an open cow. Now, if we think about if we sold that open cow for $660 and we're going to go buy a replacement for $1,600, or if we bought the replacement and we sold her 4 or 5 years later as a cull for $660, we've got $940 of depreciation. The purchase price minus the value when she left the herd. Now, obviously, every bred heifer that comes into the herd, whether we raise her or we go out and purchase her, is not going to make it back to the sale barn. And so I picked an average cow value of around $1,200 and just said on average, if we have 2% cow death loss per year, that's $24 in death loss. So if we look at our total depreciation and we divide that by 5, plus we include $24 per year for death loss, we're somewhere around $212 per year for cow depreciation. If we take that to 4 years, let's say we only get 4 years on average out of a cow, that's $260. If we only get 3 years, that's $337. You know, if we look at we said the average age of a cow, if we back up a slide, is somewhere around 5.5. Remember that means that's the average cow herd age. That means cows on average wean between 4 and 5 calves before they leave the herd. So somewhere in this example between $212 and $259 would be the average cow depreciation for this herd as we look at the cost in this particular year. Now I want to show an example of extreme depreciation. And this is one from a number of years back, and I'm guessing there's some of you who are on tonight who this might hit home for. In January of 2015, if you were going to go buy bred heifers, you would have been spending somewhere around $2,800 to a little over $3,000 for bred heifers. If those heifers were in the herd, so you bought them in January, they calved that spring, so we got a calf in 2015, a calf in 16, a calf in 17, a calf in 18, and let's say they weaned a calf in 19 but then came up open. So you bought them as a 2, they calved as a 2, as a 3, as a 4, as a 5, and as a 6. And let's say they came open as a 6-year-old. So you got 5 calves out of them, which would be less than typical for many herds. And then you culled them as an open cow in November of 2019, and they would have brought $650. So total depreciation, $3,000 minus $650 divided by 5 years is over $470 in cow depreciation per year per calf produced. When you include death loss on those cows, we're well over $500 per cow per year in depreciation. That's a big number. And I know some of you might be in the room saying, well, boy, I'm glad I didn't buy bred heifers in January of 2015. But I would just challenge you, if you kept bred heifers, or you had bred heifers in inventory in January of 2015, although you did not sell them, they could have been sold to someone else for that. So there was an opportunity to sell that bred heifer to someone else for $3,000. And even though that she may not have cost you that, there was a missed opportunity, so to speak, to sell the bred heifer for that. And so that's where I'm talking about an economic analysis, looking at where's value, even though you may not have, it may not have cost you that to raise that bred heifer, you not selling her at that time means you gave up that opportunity or that value. So as we think about cow depreciation, some of you might be saying, well, I don't really want to go through the effort of looking at opportunity cost. I'm not going to change my cow herd. I'm going to keep my own replacements. Then I'd encourage you to think about tracking all cost, tracking the cost of getting that heifer to weaning, tracking the cost to getting her from weaning to breeding, and then look at what does it cost me to get a bred heifer into the herd, and then what's the value of cows leaving the herd. And this is some thoughts that come from Dr. Trey Patterson, who's with the Padlock Ranch. He's shared with our High Plains Ranch Practicum course over a number of years, tracking the relationship or trend between the cost to get a bred female into the herd versus the value of that female, her market value when she leaves. Now, she might not just leave as an open cow, she might leave as a bred cow, but tracking that over time can really be, I think, a nice way to quickly get an idea of what's going on in terms of the relationship for you in the cost to get a female into the herd versus the value when she leaves the herd. And you know, if you're in a 100 cow herd and you want to do a quick and dirty on this, just think about what did it cost me to get a bred heifer in this year, and what was the value of cows that left. And don't forget the cows that didn't leave, the cows that died. Make sure you take that into account as well, because they're fully depreciated, right? They have zero value. In fact, I might argue they have actually a negative value, because if you need to hire someone to haul them off, you had to pay to do that. But get a understanding or get a picture of what's the relationship between the cost to get a cow into the herd and the value when she leaves. If you take a snapshot of that in a particular year, that can give you an idea of what's happening in terms of depreciation and depreciation cost over the whole cow herd. Again, remind yourself, or don't forget this formula: purchase price or development cost minus sales price divided by productive years in the herd. So sometimes I think this then raises the question, should I buy or raise replacements? And this is one I think you really have to think through. And in my mind, there are 3 things that kind of shape this idea of, do you buy or raise replacements? The first one in my mind is your resources. What are the resources that you have available to you? Second would be, what's your management? What do you like to do? What are the management skills that you have? Can you breed AI? Do you enjoy calving heifers? Do you have a feed resource that you can calve heifers and provide the nutrition that's needed to have acceptable breed up to get them back as a bred 3-year-old? And then I think the final one in my mind is, do you buy or raise replacements? It also comes down to marketing. How good are you at marketing? Are you good at marketing bred heifers, at marketing bred cows? Do you have the numbers to put together packages that allows you to do that effectively? So those three things in my mind really challenge me as I think about should you buy or raise replacements. The other one that factors into this is I think you have to think about what's the size of the cow herd that I have. If you're thinking about selling calves at weaning and you want to sell load lots of calves, which there's some real economic advantage to, if you have less than about 200 cows, I have to ask the question, uh, should you consider buying replacements? And if we're looking at somewhere between a 15 to 20% replacement rate, on 200 cows, we're looking at 35 to 40 replacements, bred replacements coming into the herd each year. If you would be able to buy your replacements and then breed those replacements to terminal bulls, you would be able to sell, uh, at least 2 pot loads of a terminally sired calf as uh, as a marketing opportunity for you. If you're keeping your own replacements, you may not have that advantage. And so I think thinking about the size of cow herds you have, thinking about your management, thinking about your marketing skills are also things that go into this question of should you buy or raise replacements. Again, these are the 3 factors in my mind that we really need to consider. So resources, I think the quality and quantity that you have is really a driver in my mind. If you have some soft feed, maybe you're in a part of the state where you have access to quite a bit of crop residue and maybe some ethanol co-products that are pretty reasonable. I think that also shapes a little bit thinking about what you might do. Maybe for you, fall calving cows fit your resources. Well, if that's the case, then maybe you want to think about sourcing replacements from people who calve in the spring, meaning some of their late calving heifers or cows could roll into a fall program. And I know that there's some concern, well, I'm just buying someone else's heifers or bred cows that were lesser in terms of their fertility. And I think there's some legitimacy around concern with that. But I also know, and I've seen for many ranchers, those later bred cows will sometimes roll right into another program. And especially if they were young cows when they fell out, maybe a 2 or a 3, they'll go catch back into a different calving time frame and still be very productive. Another thing for me that I think challenges this, if you're in some tough country, maybe you're in a place where you have some weedy species that are potentially toxic and non-native cattle just don't perform very well, then maybe you're in a scenario where you almost have to raise your replacements if you're going to be a cow-calf producer, or buy replacements from a neighbor who runs in a similar environment, who the cattle that come from them are adapted to your resources. I also think you got to think about from a resource perspective, the genetics you have. Do you have genetics that are sought after by the market from a maternal perspective? Facilities and labor. Are you able to do some things in terms of maybe developing replacement heifers or calving replacement heifers and then selling them as a bred 3 or 4? Do your facilities and your labor lend themselves to that? I think the management you have, again, what's the kind of product you want to produce? Some people really enjoy genetics and they enjoy keeping cow records. They are really passionate about developing a maternal line. Then you need to think about being able to be very effective at developing and marketing bred females. When do you want to calve? This is one also that I think shapes my thinking. If you look at many of the cows that calve in Nebraska, a lot of February through April, now many more into May, calving cows. If you're calving in May and June, there's oftentimes a lot of opportunity to go buy later calving bred heifers or cows from somewhere else and roll them into that program. Conversely, if you calve in, let's say, May and June, or even pushing into July, there's an increasing number of people in Nebraska who are looking for fall calving cows, who want a terminal program. And so being able to raise heifers and maybe calve them in your own herd and then roll them into a program that fits someone who calves the same time as you or later than you can be a real opportunity as well. I think another thing is also your perspective on buying and selling cattle. Some people do not want to bring outside cattle into their herd. They're very conscientious about that. They see that as a biosecurity risk to them. And so they want to have basically a closed herd except for maybe bringing in bulls. And I respect and appreciate that. So if that's your perspective, then obviously buying in replacements may not be a fit for you, especially buying in replacements that would be cows that were coming from someone else's herd who maybe came up open. And so that's a risk that you're not willing to take. And I understand that risk and understand why that may be something that you don't want to do. For other folks, they're in a situation where they are willing to do that and they have a terminal herd mindset. They're not keeping replacements. And so they're willing to buy and sell cattle into their herd, and they're accepting some bio security risk that comes with that. And then I already mentioned this cow herd size, thinking about the size of herd that you have. Selling packages of females, if you can, again, put together a load lot or a large group, that's to your advantage. If you have a 100 cow herd and you're just selling 5 to 10 bred females a year, that's probably not going to be a much advantage to you. That's a scenario where you might want to look more at a terminal type program. And already you have mentioned, again, the marketing perspective. Some people really enjoy this. They enjoy developing relationships with customers. They enjoy marketing their females to someone else to follow up with them, see how they're doing. If that's something you enjoy doing and you're good at, again, that's an opportunity that you maybe want to explore. For other folks, they would like to put together packages of weaned calves or yearlings, either take them to an auction barn or sell them on a video and not have to mess with any of the marketing things that go with selling bred females. And I understand that. And I think that's an important thing to know about yourself, understand about the things that you want to do, and if you are very good at that. So again, the two main drivers in the numerator for cow depreciation are purchase price or development cost minus sales price. And I want to look at some things here in the numerator in terms of things I see, producers I work with who've looked at this and have gotten aggressive about trying to address this cow depreciation issue by either getting a cow into the herd for less cost, either developing it themselves or maybe buying in one at less cost, and also finding ways to maybe capture more value from a cow when she leaves the herd. So this is sale results from a bred cow sale last January. There hasn't been a lot of bred cow sales yet this fall. And so I've looked at one from last January. This is a bred cow sale at Crawford Livestock. This was a day when it was a bred cow special, so quite a few numbers, cows that were a known quantity in many cases. But you can see the same day at Crawford, if you were looking at what a weaned heifer calf would have brought, this would have been maybe a 550 pound, 600 pound weaned heifer calf. And then looking at what the value was for a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old, 5-year-old, and then tracking those out basically to the age of 12. So if you look at this cow value curve, you can see that from the age of 2 to the age of 3, we often see value increase. And this makes sense if we think about it. If I asked many of you in the audience today, which would you rather calve? Some bred 2-year-olds, or would you rather calve some bred 3-year-olds who'd done it one time before, are older, have a lot more of their growth done? Which would you rather do? And I think for many people, the 3-year-olds would be their preference because they've calved once, they're a known quantity, they've got a little more experience, probably gonna have less challenge in caring for them than we might with a set of 2s. Also, we know that 2-year-olds are gonna tend to be less productive, calves are gonna be lighter at weaning, things like that. So we typically see for the same quality and class of cattle, often there's a value increase from the age of 2 to 3. Then from the age of 3 to 4, we might see that value drop off a little bit, but it's not unusual to see a dispersal sale of a known quantity of good bred 4-year-old cows. Again, not someone's just handful that maybe are leaving the herd for an attitude or disposition situation, but known quantity, bring every bit as much or more than bred 2s. Once we get out to age 5 and 6, we start to see that price start to drop off. Then you get out to age 7 and 8, where we start to see maybe some dental deterioration. we move from a solid mouth cow to a short spread, that's when we start to see prices start to tail off more rapidly. And then we get out to age 11 and 12, where that young bred or that older bred cow, maybe she's a broken mouth cow, she's going to bring about the same price as she would, maybe $100 more, $150 more, as she would if she was being sold to weigh up. And sometimes, in fact, locally here, we've seen some, because of, I think, the drought, some older cows bringing, maybe 5 to 10 cents per pound more than those same cows would be if they were just sold for pound price. So I think this cow value curve, understanding that, thinking about your herd, thinking about what's occurring with that is important to understand because it can give you some insight, I think, a little bit on maybe where you want to be in terms of what you're doing with cows that are in the herd. One of the clients I works with has taken this cow relationship by age quite seriously, and they annually are looking at the value of cows in their herd. They're looking at the cow value relationship by age, meaning what are those cows' market value today, and then what would be the expected value of that cow next year if this same market condition held. So they're looking at the difference in value between a 2-year-old today and a 3-year-old, a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old, and they track that out. They're also looking at what's the calf value from each class of cow. So obviously a young cow, a 2 and a 3, is not going to produce the same weight of weaned calf usually that maybe a middle-aged cow would be, a 4, 5, and 6 when she's in her prime of life. Then they're also looking at what is the cow value and her calf value in relation to expected depreciation. And then they're also looking at what's my annual cost to carry that cow another year or keep her. Doing that and looking at that relationship can sometimes provide some insight, and it may be that by the time that cow gets to age 5 or 6, where she still has quite a bit of value in the market, depending on what it costs you to carry that cow for another year, you actually may capture more value from that cow by selling her as a bred, as retaining her and keeping her out to the age of 8 or 9 or 10 when she leaves the herd. Now, again, you have to know your own numbers, you have to know your own costs. But I think for some folks, they found that marketing bred cows at the age of 5 or 6 is actually where they capture the most value in terms of production from that cow, and also minimize the amount of depreciation expense that they have. So this is just a chart that this individual put together. He looked at the age of the cow. This upper here is just the age by color. He's got them color tagged. And then he's really looking at what's the value of that cow today if I was to sell her, what's the calf value, and then what's happening here in terms of depreciation, and should I consider marketing cows someplace in the herd today based on their expected value because of what's going to happen in the future with them with depreciation. You can see right here in the heart of the herd, and I'm going to blow this up a little bit, this particular individual valued his cows, and he looked at when they got past the age of 5, cow depreciation, especially when you got to 6 and 7, really ramped up for him in his analysis. And that's not going to be the same for everybody. Where you're at in the state may influence this, but I think the thought process here is what I think is important. Understanding what's happening with cow value in the herd, and understanding from your perspective what is the value of cows you have and what's going on with cow depreciation. The other thing I think we have to be aware of and think about is the cattle cycle. This is a slide that comes from Cattle Facts, and one that they also shared in one of their recent market analysis. And I think it does a nice job giving a picture of what has kind of been the trend here over the last 7-8 years in terms of the cattle price cycle in the United States. So back around 2011, 2012, you remember the drought, we had quite a bit of cow liquidation. And then as a result of the liquidation, we had fewer numbers. So cattle prices tended to increase. As we're increasing cow numbers, we're going to send less heifer calves to the feed yard. We're going to be retaining more of those, breeding those. So that even further exasperates the shortage. And so that increased prices. And then we saw really good prices in 2015 and 16. And then with that, we're building cow numbers. As we build cow numbers, more calves coming to market, of course, then that starts to have an impact on the price. We're now sitting out here in the fall of 2020, and we've also had the drought that's impacting this, and we're seeing cow inventory drop, and we're going to start to see, and we have seen really some really high record numbers in terms of cattle placement in the feed yard. So this is kind of where we're at today in terms of the trend. So, who knows what the future holds? Nobody knows. We've seen some black swan events over the last several years that have caused some market gyrations that nobody expected. But here's where we're at today. As we think about going forward, what would we tend to expect? Well, we're going to probably tend to see cow numbers decrease for the next couple of years here, which when that occurs at some point, we're going to see more demand then for calves in terms of price, again, assuming a historic trend, and that's going to at some point then signal for cow-calf producers to begin to produce more calves. So as we think about this, again, my example earlier of cow depreciation, buying cows at the peak over here in terms of cattle prices when they were, and again, we didn't know that for sure. We didn't know that they were going to be at the peak, but that's what it turned out to be. Those cows bought at the peak were producing calves as the market was going down, and we're also salvaging those cows when the market's at the bottom. As we think about what's happening now with cattle prices are lower. We're seeing a number of heifers go to feed yards rather than be retained. This may be a time, as we think about the cycle, when a cow or a heifer developed today may then be in this part of the curve coming out of this, where she's going to be selling, or the calves that she produces are going to be sold when prices are on the increase, and then when she's sold for salvage value or sold as an open cow at the end of her productive life, when she also would be worth more. And so this is hard to predict, nobody knows, but this is something to also pay attention to as we think about cow depreciation. So what are some options and opportunities to try to address this cow depreciation? So here are some things that come to my mind and some things that I've seen producers that I work with use that have been an advantage to them. The first is to have a long breeding season and a short calving season. And some of you might be saying, well, I don't really see how that works, Aaron. I don't know how you can have a long breeding season and a short calving season. That's a scenario where maybe you have a 90-day breeding season. Maybe you start calving the 1st of March. You have a long breeding season, and then you identify cows that are not going to calve in your desired window. Maybe the time you want to calve is from early March till the middle of April. Maybe you want a 45 or 50-day calving season. By identifying late breds, you can then sell those late breds to somebody else who calves in April and May, and they fit their calving window. That allows you to probably get a higher percent of your cows that you have bred, and then those later bred cows can work in someone else's program. This can also be applied, I think, for those who are maybe in a May-June type calving program or May-June-July. Again, your later calving cows could roll into a fall program that fits someone else's calving season. And there's people out there who are looking for those kind of cows. Again, if they've known they come from a known quantity and they know what the situation is, there's nothing wrong with those, and they can roll into another calving season. Another opportunity may be some soft or easy feeds. So there's parts of the state that maybe you have a smooth brome, or you have less distance for some older cows to travel. Maybe you have crop residue with some ethanol co-products readily available. That might be a scenario where short-term cows might be a fit for you. So cows that come out of some place where maybe they've had to really hustle their lives to make a living, and maybe they're a short spread or a broken mouth cow. If they've been in an environment where they've been on extensive range, they could work in your scenario, and maybe you get 2 or 3 years of production out of those cows and you turn them. If you think back to our chart that we had here when we looked at this sales price, oftentimes a short-term bred cow is going to bring $100 to $150, maybe $200 more than what she was worth as a weigh-up cow. Well, if you look at this, if you look at a bred 3-year-old bringing $1,800, and a bred 10 or 11-year-old bringing somewhere in that, $800, $900 area, you can buy 2 short-term bred cows for the same price as what a bred 3-year-old cow is worth. Well, you're going to have less depreciation with that older short-term bred cow. Granted, you're not going to keep her as long, but you also have less investment. And so that's something for some folks to consider as well, again, depending on their resource. Another thing I think is thinking about when should you bring what age of replacement should you bring into your herd? For some folks who are in situations where maybe they're in a challenging environment, they have a tough time getting 2-year-olds rebred, maybe it's to your advantage to bring in a middle-aged cow that can handle your resources and just breed her terminally. Or maybe you're in a scenario where you're a May-June calver and you can find a good source of replacements that come on out of someone's March-April calving program, and you want to just buy in their bred replacements and go terminal with them. For some of you, maybe you have a set of really good maternal cows and you have genetics that are highly sought after. Maybe you're going to be providing the maternal side for someone's terminal program. And so you're going to get cows rebred as 2s and 3s and 4s, and then maybe market them as a bred cow at 5. Again, for some folks who maybe are on the latter end of their ranching career, they don't want to mess with calving heifers, but they'd still like to be in the cow-calf business. That might be a place that they would really like to buy some solid, good, known genetics that are middle-aged cows and still allow them to maintain the business they have and still be active in the business. I already mentioned this a little bit, but out-of-season cows as replacements. There's an increasing number of folks in Nebraska who are moving to a fall calving program. And so there's also quite a few young cows that come open in Nebraska, 2s and 3s, and cows that could roll into a fall calving program. So you preg check in the fall, young 2s and 3s, maybe even young 4s that, they did not have maybe the nutrition plan that they needed to get rebred, or for whatever reason, maybe they were less fertile, but they could then be, again, a known source, but rolled into a fall calving program and be a source of replacements there. Another opportunity to add value to cows leaving the herd is to add some weight to them. Try not to market them in what's typically the seasonal lull of the year. Typically, pound cow prices are at the bottom in the October through December time period, and then typically increase as we move into the first of the year. So if you have a way to add value to cows, maybe by adding some weight and getting them into a different marketing window, that can be another way to capture some value from some cows leaving the herd. Already mentioned this a couple times in passing, but rebreeding young cows, again, not things that have maybe some problems in terms of disposition or things like that, but cows that just didn't make the cut with the other group that are still sound and still could be a replacement for someone else. Another option that I've seen demonstrated some work done out of Iowa State looked at dollar cost averaging. So let's say I have 100 cows and on average I need to replace 17 or 18 of those cows a year. Let's say over a 10-year period, average bred heifers are going to bring somewhere around $1,600 or $1,800. So maybe I designate I'm going to spend or commit around $30,000 a year to buy replacements, to buy bred replacements. In a year like 2014, you would have only bought 10. However, in a year like last year, you might have bought close to 20 because you could buy a good young bred heifer for $1,500, $1,600. So what you're doing in fact, in a sense there, is in our cattle cycle scenario, when cows tend to be worth less, you buy more. And when cows are higher priced, you buy fewer. Really what that's doing is then you're buying more cows when they tend to be lower price, and probably also maybe selling more of those cows into the market when, from a cull cow perspective, when prices are higher. The challenge with this is maintaining cow numbers, and I think you'd have to think through how that worked for you. But this can be an advantage for some folks. Maybe you tend to have a certain number of cows you want to have around. Covering things like your overhead cost with a varying size cow herd, you need to make sure you can do that. But put a pencil to this sometime as you think about your herd. If you're buying replacements, see if it might not be an opportunity to explore. So again, in summary, as we think about this cow depreciation scenario, thinking about strategies to address that, I'd really encourage you to think through these three things: the resources you have, the management you have, and your marketing, and identify what are some things that are maybe advantages for you that you can use to address this cow depreciation situation. We are planning to try to hold some annual cow cost, unit cost production workshops in 2021. If that's something that's of interest to you, please send me an email or give me a phone call. We'll be happy to mark you down so that when we're doing those, if you'd like to be part of that 2-day workshop, you can know about that. Also, if you have questions around the presentation from tonight, looking at cow depreciation and opportunities to try to reduce that, I'd encourage you to give me a call or shoot me an email. I'd be happy to visit with you about your own situation and maybe some things you're thinking through, and then also could maybe even put you in contact with some producers who are trying or have done the idea or concept that you're considering, and you can pick their brain and learn some things before maybe you jump into that with both feet. Again, thanks for the opportunity to visit tonight. If you have questions, please give me a call or shoot me an email.